For our next segment of huge news you've absolutely never heard about, the world is getting ready to welcome a new country to the map. Within the Indonesian archipelago in Southeast Asia lies the country of Papua New Guinea. And within Papua New Guinea sits the small autonomous island of Bougainville. After an incredibly long struggle, the island, roughly the size of Puerto Rico, is set to become its own nation in 2027. To understand why, we'll need to turn back the clock, because the history of Bougainville is basically the plot of a Far Cry game. The island first got its name from the French scientist and explorer Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, who became the first European to encounter the island in 1768. Bougainville would eventually be colonized by the German Empire, who would have to hand over the island to the Allied powers after World War I. The British then handed the governance of what would become modern Papua New Guinea to Australia. By this point, the British were so good at colonizing that even their colonies had colonies. As Australians are basically just tall dwarves cooked in the sun, they immediately started looking for precious minerals. And you better believe they found some. The island of Bougainville hosted an enormous stockpile of 20 million ounces of gold and 5.3 billion tons of copper. This $90 billion discovery was a huge find for the island, being worth approximately $750,000 for every resident. The Rio Tinto Mining Corporation would go on to set up the Panguna mine. And like every underdeveloped place on Earth blessed with natural resources, Bougainville would be cursed.
The Bougainville Copper Project has been described as the largest grassroots mining operation yet undertaken. 90,000 tons of ore will be mined and processed each day, and at scheduled production rates, that volume will be maintained for 25 to 30 years.
As you might have guessed, the locals didn't enjoy the profits of these impressive natural resources. Despite the mine being responsible for an estimated 12% of Papua New Guinea's GDP, the indigenous people of Bougainville received less than 1% of these profits. Meanwhile, the government of Papua New Guinea was more than happy to accommodate the Rio Tinto Mining Corporation, themselves enjoying a 20% ownership stake in the mine. At one point, the Panguna mine accounted for 45% of Papua New Guinea's natural export revenue. Along with this, the local population were seeing an influx of foreign workers from Australia and Papua New Guinea, who earned high salaries from extracting these resources out of the ground. By the 1980s, Bougainville was importing more miners than Jeffrey Epstein. If the severe wealth inequality wasn't enough, the Panguna mine went on to cause significant environmental damage, as well as cancer and birth defects in nearby residents. The people of Bougainville were now getting passed over for high-paying local jobs. They were giving away 99% of the riches beneath their feet, and the mine was now actively shortening their lifespan. In 1989, the island reached a boiling point, with the separatist movement taking up arms to gain independence from Papua New Guinea. 15 to 20,000 people died over the following decade, and the mine hasn't reopened ever since. By this time, Papua New Guinea was officially independent from Australia, but the two nations had a close relationship. Australia officially supported Papua New Guinea's campaign against the Bougainville separatists, but declined to provide any military support. Perhaps the defining moment of the conflict was when Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Julius Chan secretly hired a UK-based mercenary company to help recapture the Panguna mine. Ultimately, the plan leaked to the Australian press, which nearly ended in a military coup within Papua New Guinea. Years later, it was alleged by Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Michael Somare that the Rio Tinto Mining Corporation helped fund the conflict to regain control of the mine. Here's what he wrote in a previously unreleased affidavit written by Somare when he was opposition leader in 2001. Just keep in mind that BLC refers to a subsidiary of Rio Tinto. In Somare's words, quote, "Because of Rio Tinto's financial influence in Papua New Guinea, the company controlled the government. The government of Papua New Guinea followed Rio Tinto's instructions and carried out its requests. BCL was directly involved in the military operations on Bougainville, and it played an active role. BCL supplied helicopters, which were used as gunships, the pilots, troop transportation, fuel, and troop barracks. It is my opinion that absent Rio Tinto's mining activity on Bougainville, or its insistence that the Panguna mine be reopened, the government would not have engaged in hostilities or taken military action on the island." This would be backed up by a statement by a former separatist fighter in 2011 who stated, quote, "We knew that BCL was financing this war on Bougainville, because when we were fighting, all BCL vehicles were being used by the security forces. In 2011, a Rio Tinto executive called these accusations completely unfounded. When a peace agreement was eventually struck in 2001, a primary condition was that a referendum on Bougainville's political status would be held within 20 years. Despite the peace deal being signed, some key figures within Bougainville's separatist movement would maintain loyalist militias. The two most notable are Francis Ona and Noah Musenku, who would both declare themselves kings of their respective regions. As we previously mentioned, Bougainville is basically the setting of a Far Cry game. As promised, the referendum for Bougainville's independence was held in 2019, with over 98% of the island voting for full independence. In 2021, an agreement was reached that Bougainville would be granted independence by Papua New Guinea in 2027. Although the political will for independence is strong, owing largely to the island's cultural identity, the practical challenges for this transition will be enormous. Being an independent nation requires a hugely expanded system of administration, customs and border control, and central banking arrangements. This isn't even considering international recognition. It should also be noted that although independence sentiment is extremely popular, Bougainville is incredibly reliant on Papua New Guinea. In terms of security, the island doesn't have a standing army, so it's currently unclear whether it plans to build its own, or just ask Papua New Guinea to do them a solid. Alternatively, if they pointed out how close they are to China, Uncle Sam would have a military base operational on the island within 3 to 5 business days. There's also the issue of Bougainville's economy, because in terms of money, they have no money, owing to the island being critically underdeveloped. Papua New Guinea funded 93.4% of Bougainville's 2024 budget. According to a 2025 report by the Lowy Institute, there are approximately 400 people working in Bougainville's public service. The report details how these 400 people often work in rented and dilapidated buildings, with the government suffering from high levels of absenteeism, corruption, poorly trained staff, and a huge lack of funding. It takes a lot more than 400 people to run a country, especially when it takes 10 times its internal revenue just to maintain basic government functions. Being a brand new nation isn't easy no matter how you slice it. The most recent country recognized by the UN was South Sudan in 2011. In the immediate aftermath of its independence, South Sudan struggled with economic instability, corruption, and a war that went on to kill 380,000 people. To have any hope of succeeding, Bougainville will need serious help to even function at a minimum capacity. As for what the new nation will mean for things like UN voting, maritime trade routes, fishing rights, and the still shuttered Panguna mine, only time will tell. As always, we'll provide an update if necessary, but our team would like to preemptively congratulate Bougainville for finally earning their hard-won independence. In the meantime, if the Bougainville government needs someone to write a national anthem or design an epic flag, they know where to find us.